The roster is set for now. Hello and welcome to my podcast. Do me a favor, subscribe to the John Keim Report wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us there as part of Ampire Media, Ampire. Always much appreciated when you tune in. Don't forget, you can read my work on ESPN.com. Also, don't forget the John Keim Report is presented by AAA. And if you want to, you don't forget, like you're listening to it in the audio, you can hear it. These are the shirts from chubbyshorts.com. Go there. You can get $10 off by using the promo code Keim, chubbyshorts.com. All right, so let's get into the cuts because the Commanders made their first wave of cuts. Well, I'd say first wave of cuts. They set their 53-man roster for now. And I say for now because there will be some more moves. Heck, by the time this comes out, maybe there's even one or two other moves. Getting guys on the practice squad, maybe claiming somebody off waivers. So there is still some fluidity to this. How much it will change, I don't know. Going to go over a few things and just kind of look at areas where they might try to do something, and then we'll go from there. So, and I do have a little thing at the end that I want to address. So, a couple of things that jump out. One, Ali Cajo, the linebacker, good for him because he earned his spot on this roster. Now, you never, again, these are the kind of guys, you never know what's going to happen, but he earned this spot. And when you know that, like Dan Quinn started talking about him, he's square to the line. He's a good tackler. That stuff gets you noticed and it gets you on the roster. And he can help. He can be developed for sure. Now, will he have a big role this year? Probably not. But is he worth developing? Absolutely. Because you can find like those middle linebacker types, those inside linebacker types, a lot of times you're going to get those 5th, 6th, 7th round guys, or in this case, undrafted, who can develop into something solid. Anybody who goes back a ways knows about Antonio Pierce, made as an undrafted guy, hell of a leader, hell of a linebacker. So is he there? Is Cajo, is he the next Antonio Pierce? I don't know. But what I do know is he earned the spot on here. And I wasn't sure if he could get it, if he'd be able to get it. And part of the reason is that, you had to keep an extra linebacker to keep him on the roster. So, and before the game Saturday, I talked to a couple of people that said, hey, most likely 10 defensive linemen. That was the desire. Well, what it tells me is in that last game that Cajo continued to impress him and some of the other linemen did not. So you shift because you know that you don't want to expose this young man to waivers perhaps, and knowing that, hey, based on his play, somebody might pick him up. When that's the case, you keep him on the roster. He earned it. Good for him. And it's nice to see stories like that. And I told he's a guy that I talked about for a couple weeks. I didn't know if he would make it. In fact, in my 53, I did not have him on because I thought they would stick with the 10D lineman. But he absolutely was a guy that deserved strong consideration, if nothing else. And I felt like he played certainly the best of the undrafted group. And again, he earned the spot. Good for him. So couple other things, Sam Cosmi goes to physically unable to perform list. One of the things I had talked to somebody back in early June and just mentioned shoot, at the earliest could be mid-October. And at that time, they were very optimistic that some people were that, maybe sooner than that. Well, that still puts him in the time frame. We with the PUP list because you're going to miss 4 games, and maybe he can come back in early October. We still don't know. I still think, when we talk to Dan Quinn, they just keep saying he's hit all his markers, and that's what we know. And he looks good. He seems to feel good. I think he always felt like when Quinn would talk about like that, the on the table being the home opener, the opener was on the table. I don't know that Cosmi would have agreed necessarily, but I think this kind of settles it, and not a surprise move. I think a lot of us kind of anticipated this, but I still would say there's optimism about when he can return because even mid-October would be 9 months. That's quick for ACL, right? That's typically 9 to 12 months, but and I think, it certainly sounds like that he would be able to be back in that time. So good news, so it's not great news from the start of the season, but I think the good news is he remains on pace to certainly return and help this team this year. For now, like they cut Michael Dieter. You can, if you want to get him on the practice squad, you can do that. They cut Nick Harris the other day. They don't. So who is the backup center? Well, right now it's Nick Allegretti. And I told you about that early in the summer, like that they felt like he could go be a snap. He just didn't work a lot at it. So you never know. But it is, I think, like he's a pretty smart player. and he has done it before. I don't know if he's even done a game, but I know he's worked at it before. He's smart, and I think you can go from guard to center and handle that. I've seen him others do it, but they feel confident that he could do it. Now, of course, if something happens like in the opener and he has to go do it, the good news is you have two guys on the right side, Connolly and Wiley, who can play right tackle. Whether whoever starts, they've been using Wiley there, but you can put Wiley inside, or you could put Chris Paul over at right guard because he's gotten work there too. So you don't have to shift too much, but that helps. Like the reason why you can cut a Dieter, who to me, like he did not have a strong season last year. I think we all know that. Um, and if I did have him on my 53 because I thought they might keep a backup center on there, I kind of talked myself out of the fact that, hey, Allegretti can do it. But, you know, do you feel more comfortable get the guy with experience? But again, they could end up putting him on the practice squad. So I don't think you were in danger of losing him. And if you do, I think you're still okay. So some surprises. I don't know if there were any real surprises. Cleveland Farrell, what concerned me, and he was like when I had 10 D linemen, he was my 10th. Because what concerned me was fourth quarter, he was playing against Cincinnati. Excuse me, yeah, against Cincinnati, he's playing in that game. In the second quarter against the Ravens, he's playing in that game. Like those aren't good signs for a guy of his status. Like they know what he can do. Like how much did they really need to see? So that was a troubling sign to me for him, but I still put him on there because again, 10 D linemen, and sometimes things change. Like I remember one year I asked the general manager of the team, it's like, hey, I asked him about a certain player. It's like, oh, he's safe. He's going to be on. So then you just kind of like, okay, he's on. 2 weeks later, he was cut because things change sometimes. And I do think that last game solidified probably for Cahill and maybe for Farrell as well. And guys like KJ Osborne, because if you don't do well enough, then that's part of the decision making, right? So, and with Osborne, again, he was a sixth receiver kind of almost by default a little bit because I don't know that anybody really earned that spot. He was kind of the guy like, well, he has experience. And a couple weeks ago, Dan Quinn talks about like, I'm starting to feel his speed. He can be a backup returner and all that. Like, hey, that's a good sign for him. Well, beyond that point, it never really took off. I still had him on there because again, you thought they would take six receivers, and I still think you end up with six receivers. That's why I say these things are fluid. They only have five right now, but I think I could definitely see them ending up with six. But you can get guys like Ja'Cory Brooks on the practice squad, a guy like Jacoby Jones, whom they cut, can get on the practice squad. Guys like that you can keep around and develop. Like Brooks is absolutely worth developing. I think they both showed something this summer that is worth developing. Brooks, I like the size. I like the way he ran on some of the screens. On one of the screens the other day, just 7 tough yards. Like that stuff is good. So I like what he can do. Now you can do it on the practice squad and you can show something there, but it wouldn't shock me if they go out and get another receiver for sure. But yeah, like things change, and like that's the fun and the fluidity of this business that guys earn their spot, and there's been every year it seems like somebody earns that spot in that final preseason game. That's why that game, while it may not be as fun for fans, it absolutely matters to the players. So the other thing, 3 quarterbacks, wasn't sure about that one either. Josh Johnson is on. Obviously, Sam Hartman was cut. I still hear that there's a good chance he ends up on the practice squad. I think with the couple things with Josh Johnson, I know we had a couple of interceptions, but there were a lot of times where he looked fairly good and that the offense was much smoother with him out there than certainly with Hartman. He's also, I think, a very good mentor. Now, Jaden Daniels has a good mentor also in Marcus Mariota, but the more guys you have like that, I just think the better. It turns into a really good room. And I think Johnson would be a part of that, just like Jeff Driscoll was a part of that last year, et cetera. And I think the other part of that is with Mariota has the Achilles tendonitis. How confident are they that that's not going to flare up? Because if it does, you're definitely going to want that guy. And if you want to keep 3, did you want to expose Johnson to waivers, fearing that maybe somebody else would pick him up? And they of course did not want to do that because you could not roll with Sam Hartman as your third guy on the roster and having him be an injury away from being a backup. You needed to have somebody else there. And I wasn't sure, like I thought they would end up with 3. I didn't, but I thought maybe they might go out and if they weren't pleased with Johnson, that maybe they go get a Jeff Driscoll or someone who they on the roster who's on the street or somebody else. But in this case, you know what? It also makes sense because Johnson's been around all summer. So he knows the offense, he knows his group. If you think it's similar, then you just keep him and you roll with it. And there you go. So he's a good guy to have around. He knows his role. He's going to go into a game. We've seen it before. He can go into a game. He's not going to embarrass himself. Yes, he may make some mistakes. That's why he would be a third quarterback. But you could do a lot worse than him as a third quarterback. And as others have pointed out, you get down to your third quarterback, man, you're kind of screwed. So we've seen that before as well, too. So um, anyway, and then so let's look at some of the draft picks too that they have gotten rid of. So the draft picks that are still here from the past, from before this group arrived, it's Quan Martin, Chris Rodriguez, Percy Butler, Cosme, John Bates, Terry McLaurin, Deron Payne, Chris Paul. Those guys are still here. Cole Turner was cut, and I'm missing someone else who was cut too. Okay. Oh, it was Andre Jones. That was the other one who was cut too. So they have 8 draft picks left from before the time this group got here. And again, this is why this team has been in a certain situation where you've got to get a lot of veterans in the 30 plus department, mostly on 1 year deals, and then a lot of young building blocks too, starting to get that because you just didn't have enough in between because of all the failed draft picks from before. A lot that you miss on those number 1 picks, man, it is a killer. And this, like with Turner, he got cut last year too, so he could end up on practice squad. I don't know, but that you go back to that trade a couple of years ago where they have the 11th pick. They liked Olave. They wanted to get more from it, and you got 4 picks. And it was at the time like okay, like I think you would know I really think that Chris Olave was going to be a really good receiver, but I understood you get more picks. And at the time you get okay, you got Jahan Dotson, you got Brian Robinson, you got Sam Howell, you got Cole Turner out of that mess, right? Now you still turned in Brian Robinson to a draft pick, okay, but at the time like okay, you got multiple guys who could be starters for you. And then it just didn't work out because it just kind of went up in flames. And like, if you had stayed at 11, could you have had, you can play the what if game all along, but something that looked reasonable at the time turned out not to work that way. So just like when St. Louis got all those draft picks for in the RG3 trade, it didn't like have these great stars that came out of that. So sometimes you make those trades, you get a lot of picks, it doesn't work out. So it always tells you if you can get the player you really like, take the player you really like. Anyways, so and then a couple more things like going to the running back room too, where they kept 4, not a surprise there. Obviously, they traded Brian Robinson. The other thing to note with that, you have Rodriguez, McNichols, Eckler, and Krosky Merritt. The question is, who's going to be that guy? So we know what Eckler is, right? Eckler is their third down back who can carry the ball when they need him to, but you don't want to overdo it because you want to make sure that that guy lasts all year. He can also return kicks for you and be dangerous in that role. You don't want to overuse him. So is there going to be one bell cow? And I talked about this the other day, and I said I wondered if they could keep 4 running backs active. And I still would say that because typically you do not. Typically it's 3. I say typically because sometimes maybe you do, because if they all can help you in some way, then if the 4th guy can't help on special teams, well, then you don't keep him active. But if he can, then maybe you do instead of a guy at another spot. So there is a scenario for that, but you're not going to have 4 running backs typically get carries in a game. And so I don't know that this has always felt, even when Robinson was here, like it would be a running back by committee situation. So could that mean, obviously Eckler gets his stuff, and then, McNichols, we know his role, and he's a special teams guy too. But I don't know how it's going to break down. Would Rodriguez be a guy that gets a little bit more? He's going to get more than he did in the past, but is he going to be their number 1 back? I don't think you're going to have that quote number 1 back the way that maybe other situations do, because you have the committee, like you have him in this role, you have this guy in this role. You want to make sure it doesn't become tipping your hand when these guys come in, but you can do it that way. And I think that's how they're going to go. I don't think you're going to see like Chris Rodriguez suddenly become their 20 carry a game guy, unless of course he goes out there and starts dominating like that with with whatever. So, but Krosky Merritt showed some stuff in the preseason. Like you would want to get him if he's going to be active. You'd like to get him some touches because there's an element there that that others don't have. I think I really, really like that 27-yard run and some of the other runs he had. He is a violent runner. So, I think for him, you don't want to overuse him to durability. We don't know what it's going to be like. So I think that's why I say I think there's going to be a role for all of them to a degree, right? We don't know yet, though. We don't know yet the full role. The other part of the run game is Deebo Samuel, Jaden Daniels. So those guys, like obviously a lot of the run game will be based around Jaden Daniels. Not like he's going to carry 15, 20 times a game, but a lot of what he can do will help that run game. And so that's why I say like it's going to be a by committee situation. It certainly feels like so. And listen, man, it wouldn't shock me if they continue to look for running. I think they're going to look at positions all over the place because you that's the only way you get better. And one thing we know with Adam Peters and all these guys, like every team should be diligent scouring the waiver wire. Like I think they pretty much all do that. If you want to keep your job, they will do that as well. So if there's a spot they can improve, sure, go do it. But it's funny because the other day I said something about like the running back situation. I think people sometimes hear only parts of what you say and they kind of either extrapolate a little bit, misconstrue a little bit, or they don't take the full context. And I don't know how that's going to go at this point. But I do believe it will be some sort of running back by committee situation. But if you get a hot hand, you ride the hot hand, right? So there you go. So anyways, folks, I do want to close it out, and this is very tough for me to talk about. So I'm only going to say it for a minute, and when another time I will talk about it. But if you have followed this team for a while, you probably have heard the news about Rick Snider, is a dear friend of mine. He passed away from he suffered a stroke 2 weeks ago, passed away earlier on Tuesday. This is really, really difficult for me. And so I don't want to, at some point I'm going to ask you for more than 2 minutes so I can talk about him. Right now, I just think it's a little bit hard for me to talk about. So I'm just going to end it there, but I wanted to pass that along, and I don't want to ignore that because he is somebody who is deeply important to me and meaningful to me. And so at some point I will share more memories of him because he's a damn special person. So I appreciate you tuning in, and I will talk to you next time.